There is a generation that doesn't ask for attention, doesn't explain their pain, and doesn't need the world to understand them. They just keep going. Quietly. This is Generation X, and if you really look closely, you'll notice something strange. They feel everything, but show almost nothing. Gen X was born into a world that didn't pause for emotions. There were no safe spaces, no long conversations about mental health, no one asking, "Are you okay?" Life was simple on the surface, but emotionally it was complex. Children grew up faster than they should have. They learned responsibility early. They learned silence early. And most importantly, they learned that if something goes wrong, you fix it yourself. That belief didn't just stay in childhood, it became their identity. Think about this for a moment. If a person grows up in an environment where emotions are not discussed, where vulnerability is not encouraged, what happens to their mind? It adapts, not by becoming emotionless, but by becoming controlled. Gen X didn't stop feeling, they just stopped showing. They built an internal system where emotions are processed quietly, privately, and often alone. And this is where the difference begins. Because millennials grew up in a completely different world, a world that said, speak your truth, express yourself, let people know how you feel. So naturally, their minds developed differently. They became expressive, open, emotionally aware. But Gen X, they became observant, reserved, emotionally disciplined, not better, not worse, just different. Gen X doesn't trust quickly, not because they're negative, but because they've seen too much uncertainty. They grew up during times of change, families breaking apart, economies shifting, a world slowly becoming unstable. And when a child sees instability early in life, their brain learns one thing. Don't depend too much on anything or anyone. So they don't. They rely on themselves. They don't expect too much. They don't get easily attached. And they don't believe in guarantees. This makes them strong. But it also makes them distant. Have you ever noticed how Gen X handles problems? They don't panic. They don't overreact. They don't make noise. They analyze, they adjust, and they move forward. Because psychologically, they were trained for survival, not emotional comfort, but real life resilience. While others might ask, why is this happening to me? Gen X quietly thinks, okay, what do I do now? But there's something deeper happening beneath that calm surface. Something most people never see. Pressure, years of it, unspoken stress, unreleased emotions, unprocessed experiences. Because when a person keeps everything inside for too long, it doesn't disappear. It stays. It builds. It turns into a quiet weight they carry every day. And the hardest part? They don't even realize how heavy it has become. This is why Gen X often feels tired, even when nothing seems wrong. Not physically tired, mentally, emotionally, because they've been strong for too long, without ever stopping to ask themselves, what am I actually feeling? And when it comes to relationships, Gen X can be misunderstood. They don't express love loudly. They don't constantly communicate their feelings. But that doesn't mean they don't care. In fact, they care deeply. They just show it differently, through actions, through consistency, through being there when it truly matters, not through words, but through presence. But here's the challenge. In a world that now values expression, visibility, and emotional openness, Gen X sometimes feels out of place because the world changed and they had to adapt again. From no internet to digital overload, from privacy to constant exposure, from silence to endless noise, and yet they adjusted, just like they always have. But adaptation doesn't erase identity. Deep down, they are still the same: independent, private, emotionally contained. They don't need validation. They don't chase attention. They don't depend on approval. And in today's world, that is rare. But let's be honest, strength like this comes with a cost. Because when you always handle things alone, you forget how to share the weight. When you always stay strong, you forget what it feels like to let go. And when you never express emotions, you slowly lose the ability to understand them. That's why many Gen X individuals struggle to open up, not because they don't want to, but because it feels unfamiliar, even uncomfortable. Vulnerability, to them, feels like losing control, and control is something they've depended on their entire lives. But despite all of this, Gen X is powerful, not in a loud way, not in an obvious way, but in a deeply psychological way. They are stable in chaos, calm under pressure, grounded when everything feels uncertain. They don't break easily, and even when they do, they rebuild quietly. So if you ever meet someone who seems distant, who doesn't talk much about their emotions, who handles everything on their own, don't assume they don't feel. Don't assume they don't care. Look deeper, because behind that silence is a mind that learned to survive without support, a heart that learned to feel without expression, and a person who became strong, not because life was easy, but because they had no other choice. This is the psychology of Gen X, a generation shaped by independence, defined by resilience, and misunderstood by a world that never saw their full story. And maybe, just maybe, the strongest people are not the ones who speak the most, but the ones who carry the most without ever saying a word.